In the world of corporate finance, some numbers just whisper, but others, they scream. Today, we're going to talk about a number that absolutely screams. It's a public report card on billion-dollar deals, often years after the ink is dry. Welcome to The Explainer.
All right, let's just start with this number, $22 billion. Now, in the world of accounting, a figure this big, it's not just a data point. It's a confession. It is a very public admission of a massive, massive mistake.
This is what's known as a Goodwill Impairment. And I know that might sound like some dry, obscure accounting term, but it's not. It is one of the most powerful signals an investor can get about the success or, the spectacular failure of a company's biggest strategic bets. Okay, so to really wrap our heads around that multi-billion-dollar admission, we've got to back up a step. We need to understand what goodwill even is. You hear the term thrown around all the time, right? But in the world of accounting, it means something very, very specific. Think of it like this. When you buy a company, you pay for all the stuff you can touch and see, right? Its factories, its inventory, but you almost always pay more than that. You're paying a premium for all the things you can't touch. We're talking about its killer brand name, its diehard customer base, the brilliant team they're bringing on board. That extra amount you pay over the value of the physical stuff, that is goodwill. Now here's where it gets really interesting. For decades, accountants basically had this huge philosophical battle over how to treat this asset. Is goodwill like a melting ice cube, something that just naturally and predictably loses its value over time? Or is it more like a fine wine, something that holds its value, maybe even gets better with age, and only goes bad if something specific happens to spoil it? Well, in the end, the fine wine theory won out. The people who set the accounting rules decided that the whole melting ice cube idea, what's called amortization, it kind of lets management off the hook. It hides their mistakes. They argued that a sudden, sharp impairment charge sends a way more powerful and honest signal. It's the company being forced to say, hey, that huge deal we made, it's not working out like we promised. It forces accountability. Okay, so if goodwill is this fine wine, how do you test if it's turned vinegar? How do companies actually figure out that it's gone bad and that it's time to take one of these huge, painful write-downs? On paper, the process itself looks refreshingly simple. First, a company calculates what a business unit is really worth today, its fair value. Then it compares that number to what the balance sheet says it's worth, its carrying amount. And if the value on the books is higher than the real-world value, boom, you've got yourself an impairment. And right here, this is the heart of the whole matter. This is where a supposedly objective test slams right into a very subjective reality. Because figuring out what a business is really worth, that's not a science, it's an art. And guess who's holding the paintbrush? Yep, company management. And that's the whole ballgame. Management is in the driver's seat. They're the ones projecting future cash flows. They're the ones picking the growth rates and determining the discount rates. And just a tiny optimistic little tweak to any one of those inputs can make a billion-dollar impairment problem, poof, just vanish, at least for another quarter. So because management has all this wiggle room, and let's be honest, because impairments often get announced way too late, the smart money, the really sophisticated investors, they don't sit around and wait for the official bad news. They've learned to hunt for the red flags. And you can find some of these clues right in the numbers. For me, the most powerful red flag of all is when a company's total stock market value is consistently lower than its book value. That's not a whisper. That is the entire market shouting that the assets on the balance sheet, including all that goodwill, are probably worth a whole lot less than what the company is claiming. But the story behind the numbers is often just as revealing. You got to listen closely on those earnings calls. When you start hearing executives talk about integration challenges or culture clashes, pay attention. Or when you see that the brilliant founders of the company they just bought are bolting for the exit the second their contracts are up, those are huge red flags. It's a sign that the very value they paid a premium for is literally walking right out the door. All right, let's put all this theory into practice. Let's see how all these concepts play out in the real world with a pretty spectacular case study, the story of Kraft Heinz. So back in 2015, you had these superstar investors, 3G Capital, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, and they engineer this huge merger of Kraft and Heinz. A food giant is born, and with it, a mountain of goodwill. The game plan was simple, aggressive cost-cutting. But by 2019, reality bit back hard. A shocking $15.4 billion impairment.
It was a public confession that their entire deal thesis was broken. They'd cut costs so much, they'd hollowed out the brands, just as consumer tastes were changing. And those write-downs have just kept coming, acting as this multi-year scorecard on a failed strategy. And that's why this is so on the money. Goodwill impairment truly is the ultimate scoreboard for corporate M&A. It is so much more than just an accounting entry. It's a public verdict on management's biggest, most expensive strategic decisions. It tells you whether the team in charge is a skilled capital allocator or if there's someone who consistently destroys value by overpaying for deals. And this is why it all matters so much. Getting a handle on goodwill impairment, it's like leveling up your financial intelligence. It lets you read between the lines of a financial report and see the real story of a company's strategic wins and, more often than not, its failures. So what's next? Well, regulators are now pushing for even more transparency. They want to force companies to disclose the specific goals of their acquisitions and then report on whether they're actually meeting them. And this leaves us with a really fascinating final question. If that M&A scoreboard becomes visible to everyone in real time, not just years down the road, will it finally force companies to be more disciplined and actually make better deals in the first place?